I would be shocked if the majority of our CEO counterparts aren't struggling with something, whether that's the breakdown of a marriage, whether that's, a kid who's struggling in school or who themselves is sort of
Mhm.
sick, whether it's trying to manage sort of ailing parents or the death of a parent, the sort of time at which, in our space, you sort of, take on the role of CEO. It's at a time of life where you're just getting absolutely battered from left, right, and center.
Welcome to the CEO Pajama Time podcast. Today, I'm super excited to host Jen Goldsack, the CEO of Dime. Dime is actually a nonprofit organization, but as I'm sure Jen can tell you, the CEO job is real. And so today, we're going to really dive into Jen's journey as the CEO of Dime and how she's navigated a lot of the various inflection points. I'm sure most of you know by now, but the concept of CEO Pajama Time is essentially leaders spend their days building and running their organizations. It's the nights and weekends when they finally have a chance to think about the next big thing, the bigger picture. And that's what I call CEO Pajama Time. Jen and I often exchange emails when we're in our little pajama time, on various occasions. So we know it's true and we know we're both doing it. So hopefully today we can talk more about it. So Jen, welcome to the podcast.
Sorry, I'm delighted to be here, and I will share that I actually considered joining you in my pajamas today, but thought that might take the edge off the more professional tone I know you're trying to set here.
Yeah, it's funny because I keep toying with the like, ooh, should I have my guests wear pajamas? And then I'm like, but I want to wear a nice hat. So then it's not fair if they're in their pajamas and I'm wearing a hat. So yeah, but it would have been welcome.
You are a good
Um,
partner for making sure that everyone feels comfortable.
Thanks. So Jen, tell us, like, for just kind of, let's start with just so everyone in the audience understands what is Dime? What do you do? What's your place in the world?
Yeah. So Dime, or the Digital Medicine Society, is a global nonprofit. And sorry, essentially, we exist to support those innovators and organizations, both on the tech side of the house and the healthcare side of the house, whether that's medical product development or whether it's healthcare delivery, who are frankly trying to do hard things every day to make sure, as the healthcare industry, the industry that exists to care for people, the industry that consumes over $5 trillion in the US, over $11 trillion internationally, that as we go on this journey, that those individuals who are doing the hard work feel supported and that we can actually be effective in taking this moment that's happening on our watch, and making sure that the industry persists into the future. And our sort of positioning is, if you like, some of the innovations that are going to drive a sustainable healthcare system forward in the digital era are going to come from smart investments and hard work from the innovation community. They're going to have to go it alone in some ways. Because it's a highly regulated industry, in some cases, we're going to need policy change or regulations. But there's a big gap in the middle where clarity and forward progress cannot be chipped away at by individual organizations. It will be too expensive, take too long. And sometimes those problems aren't fit for regulatory oversight. That's where Dime comes in.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So tell us the origin story. How did this come about? Was there like some problem keeping you up at night that made you start Dime?
So, um, I came to the US, in case anyone listening couldn't tell that I wasn't born here, in the winter of 2007, 2008. I was actually on the Olympic team, the US Olympic team, in Beijing in 2008, and always thought I'd sort of hurry back home to the UK. But as it turned out, I really liked the States, decided to stay. But the fall of 2008, during the global financial crisis, was not a great time to be looking for your first job as a grown ass adult. My background, I'm a chemist of all things, so I have a research background. And the only place I could find a job, I'm not joking, the only place in Philadelphia where I was living at the time was the hospital at University of Pennsylvania.
Mm.
And I got hired by a brilliant woman who recognized that I knew how to do research. She ran health services research at Penn. And really, that meant that I was exposed to the digitization of healthcare from the very
Mm.
start. 2009, the High Tech Act was passed. So I spent a number of years working in the digitization of healthcare on the healthcare delivery side. Then I move across to the clinical trial side of the house before taking my turn through a few different startups. At this point, I was absolutely convinced, sorry, of the promise of the digitization of healthcare,
Hmm.
perhaps to be one of the last um, ropes we could cling on to save this industry.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I felt absolutely certain that the likelihood of us getting this right, given the enormous spend that would be necessary, was pretty low. And that's why we
Hmm.
established time.
Yeah. That makes sense. So tell us. I mean, you've already. I'm gonna. I've heard a lot about Dime on a lot of podcasts, and we've been on them together often as well. I'm gonna say, forget Dime for a second. What about Jen as a leader, right? So your role at Dime is very public facing. You're always convening and hurting the ecosystem. But you as a leader, when you think about yourself, obviously, you mentioned you're a former Olympian. Um, you have a lot of degrees as well. And so I'm thinking about like what fuels you, what motivates you as a leader and a person.
You know, it's it's a big question, but I think it's a really important question because I don't think we can continue doing this hard work day after day unless our why is really strong. So, having grown up in the UK, I was used or exposed to quite a different health system, and I was
Hmm.
intrigued, curious by the way it worked and didn't work in the US when I sort of arrived. But I attribute the fact that after I retired from competitive sport, the fact that I landed in healthcare by nothing other than, good luck, good fortune, really helped me manage that transition. You often hear of, professional athletes who struggle to make a transition to a second career. You go from spending, years of your life waking up every day with permission to be really selfish because it's
Hmm.
lauded that you are every day working to be the very best in the world at something. And then, what's that identity in your second career? And for me, the notion of trying to make sure that we could care for people every single day, every single person who needed care, and we could do it in a way that is actually future proof and is not simply propping up a system today that's going to collapse under the strain tomorrow. That's been my motivator. And it's been interesting to think about how could someone who wasn't trained, as a clinician come in and offer value? How can you be creative? How can you bring that energy? And that's the piece that's important to me. No matter how hard a task is, no matter how crappy a day is, no matter how many blows you take or how you might see a colleague struggling, a partner at a different organization going through a tough time, focusing on the fact that what we're here to do is to make sure that the people who need help can have access to that and the people every day caring for them, whether that's our clinical colleagues or whether that's their sort of care partners or their support network at home, actually have what they need to hang in there. That's what gets me up every day.
Yeah. And Jen, if it's okay with you, I'm going to ask about your last year. You've been sort of public about the fact that you're unfortunately navigating a really difficult time with health challenges. So I'm curious if you're willing to open up about that and how you are still showing up at work and what is making you do that when you have every right to just like crawl into a cave and say like leave me alone now. So I'm curious how you're been able to do that.
Um, Thank you, sorry, for asking that question so thoughtfully. So, for folks listening in, I, over the winter holidays last year, so 2004, sort of holiday period, got diagnosed with late stage colon cancer. That was through an emergency admit through the emergency department, and it was incredibly frightening. But sorry, before we get to that bit, I'm actually going to take us back to a couple of months or the months leading into that diagnosis. In those months leading into the diagnosis, I thought something was wrong with me, but I didn't for a second think that it was cancer. I remember getting to health in 2024 and, because of the sort of crazy life of a CEO, and that's what we're here to talk about today, I'd worked a full day, and then I'd got on the 6 p.m. flight here on the East Coast to get out there and, been delayed on the change, and sort of 2 a.m. in the morning, I'm finally arriving at my sort of casino hotel. And I remember going to the little concession stand that they have and buying, I think I bought like 4 12-ounce, not the 8-ounce, like Red Bulls, because I had been so tired for weeks and I was exhausted and I was looking at my schedule for the next few days. And I honestly didn't know how I was going to get through it. And this persisted for most of the fall. And my self talk was, I mean, and I'm going to be sort of really honest because I think this is sort of the purpose of us having the conversation. My self talk was, you loser, you absolute loser.
Wow.
The superpower of, my previous life as an athlete is you know when to turn on and you know when to turn off. You know where that red line is. You can get close to it, but you never blow through it and you can recover. And I just thought that I was failing to do that. And I couldn't understand what I was doing wrong. And there's so much that we see in the media and in the literature about sort of burnout and what it feels like. And I just thought, I have this incredible organization and a team that I love. I have partners that I respect enormously. I love what I do every day. And yet I can't even focus. I am so tired. I'm feeling like I want to put my head down on the desk. And I was having, all of these GI issues. Shocker. I had like, by that point, my entire abdomen was full of cancer. I just didn't know. But I was like, and this is stress. You're not managing your stress. And, the thing I reflect on as I look back at that, and even this strange moment when I got the cancer diagnosis, sorry, like, was almost relieved. I was like, oh, I'm not broken. I have cancer. And I think that just gives you a
Mm,
little bit of a sense of like what stress we sort of put our body under, and that my self-talk and the conclusions that, all by myself with, overexposure to sort of sensationalized burnout, I thought that I was failing to manage myself and I pushed myself too hard. And I was fighting every day trying to get my feet back under me without recognizing that actually my entire body was being like ravaged by this sort of terrible disease. And we can come back to that if it's interesting, but, as that sort of transition happened and, I'm gonna go ahead and self-report as a younger person with, cancer, and I'm gonna own that for as long as I can. Um, you know, it was pretty frightening. The prognosis early in the year didn't look great, and I knew I was staring down the barrel of, a big fight and a lot of aggressive treatment. But, sorry, that's done sort of 2 things for me, I think, both as a sort of human experiencing the healthcare system and as sort of a professional trying to sort of show up and improve the system. Despite the fact that I have worked in healthcare for coming up on 20 years, despite the fact that I am one of the most health literate, tech literate, well connected, my husband's in the military, so well insured, you know, individuals, I'm safe at home. My board has been supportive. I have continued to be able to sort of have an income. I have the constitution of an Olympic athlete. When they said you have to get strong to survive the treatment, hasn't been a glass of chocolate milk in the state of Florida that's been safe since then. Like I came to this journey with every privilege that anyone could be afforded, and it has still been so incredibly hard. It has been so hard to navigate. It has been so hard to try and balance life and the people you love and the people who love you and work and all of these different and cost and all of these different things, and it's driven hope. Like, I honestly don't know, sorry, and I have so much respect for people with this diagnosis who don't have anywhere near the privilege that I do, and
mhm,
frankly that's the majority of the population. I don't know how people get through this. I don't know how they survive.
mhm,
This has been one of those moments where work that's always felt important has become important in a way that is actually hard for me to
mhm,
articulate. And I'll go a little bit further on that and say it's not just my journey as a patient, but it's those humans in the system that I've been exposed to.
uh-huh,
Those nurses, I mean, I spent a month in the hospital. And I'll tell you, sorry, I was in a hospital that was a great regional hospital, still running on a homegrown EHR that's 14 years old. They're not a Cerner
uh-huh,
shop, they're not an Epic shop. No one mentioned AI the entire time I was in the hospital. Like, all
mhm,
of these different pieces have made me realize that it's the humans who keep these things running. I think about, the team that I speak to in the billing office. I think about the fact that every time I go to the infusion center or the imaging center or the hospital, I know where the billing center is because I have to go in there all the time. And I see people
mhm,
walking out in tears every single time I go. Um, And I think the last piece, and I apologize, it's a horribly overly long answer, sorry, but I think the last piece, because you did ask about how does this relate to work, there's so much I could tell you about sort of the early days of sort of uncertainty and how I figured it out with our team and our board. But the reality is, I'd almost say that continuing to work through this year, as much as anything else, has been a coping mechanism.
Mhm.
I am inspired every day by the partners that we work with. I have the most phenomenal team of colleagues here at Team Dime. I mean, I think about our relationship, right? We just have these people and these humans who are sort of in our sort of professional sphere who are, just give so much great energy. And frankly, every time I've encountered a part of the system that just feels so broken that I want to sort of punch through a wall, I'm able to take a breath. And that's what, I get home and might I be
Yeah.
in pajamas sitting on the couch, but I still pop up open my laptop because that gives me a way where I feel like I can help move things forward.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. I'm very inspired. Um, I think what's fascinating, Jen, is like that whole obviously that whole journey in this year has been so tough, and you're balancing it and really finding the motivation from it. But I actually want to dig back to how you started answering the question, because that isn't what I was expecting, which is almost like how you were upset at yourself for feeling burnt out. And I want to dig into that a little bit and talk about, do you think there is a culture within today's world? And obviously, we get different influences from different places and, different types. But do you think there's a culture of almost like not allowing yourself to take that breather, or expecting a certain amount of performance? And what would you recommend for other CEOs who hopefully aren't navigating cancer but may be feeling some of those things for more standard reasons? And how would you tell them, kind of going back to yourself now, like what would you have told yourself a year ago that you would want other leaders to take away?
Yeah. And sorry, I think you make first of all, just to react to what you said about sort of this notion of sort of struggling to juggle everything for sort of normal reasons, I think the reality is of our sort of normal today, I would be shocked if the majority of our CEO counterparts sort of, across the country, across the world, aren't struggling with something that is
Hmm.
alongside work, whether that's the breakdown of a marriage, whether that's, a kid who's struggling in school or who themselves is sort of
Hmm.
sick, whether it's trying to manage sort of ailing parents or the death of a parent, the sort of time at which, in our space, you sort of, take on the role of CEO, it's at a time of life where you're just getting absolutely battered from left, right, and center. I think just
Yeah.
in trying to keep your family together, your health together, you have so many responsibilities. And so, while the story of, the current chapter in my journey is, unfortunately sort of underpinned by this battle with a pretty, savage cancer, the reality is, and I think something for us all to keep in mind as we try and be kind to ourselves and kind to our colleagues in this space is I would almost I would venture to guarantee that everyone is sort of battling something in the background. Everyone has
Yeah.
that feeling of, how much time am I spending here? That sort of like trying to split energy and compassion and, the best of yourself on any given day. And how do you parcel that out across, the responsibilities of, being a good human and a healthy
Yeah.
human and sort of work. And it's interesting. I think I was perhaps particularly vulnerable to this because, with a background as an athlete and this sort of self-talk, like I can push it and then I can pull back and I'm very good at sort of turning on, turning off. Like even as like a college athlete, and I think that sort of accounts for like a good chunk based on the data of folks who end up in these sorts of roles. You can't be sitting in lectures in college worried about practice, and you can't be at practice worrying about the homework you haven't done. You have to be present and then you have to switch
Mm.
off and you have to move on. And I think for me, sort of running into all of this, but then through all of this, I have to decide what I'm doing in the moment. Am
Mm.
I a patient who needs rest and recovery and is going to make a decision to stuff all of my worries about work or whatever else it is in a box? Because if I'm taking time to recover, let's actually do it. Or on the other hand, if I'm deciding to open my computer, if I'm present with my team or colleagues, if I'm engaging in work product, like be present. Don't be worried about
Hmm.
the other things. And if I can't show up like that, then don't show up like that. Because
Yeah.
I think one of the greatest challenges, and we talk a lot about task switching and those sorts of things, but I think when we're juggling all of these different pieces, being truly present in what you're doing is really hard. And I've sort of recommitted to that this year and I found it really helpful. I've also been a lot more transparent as a leader in terms of what my struggles are. For me, one of the hardest things about this was frankly being vulnerable. Again, we all have these stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. I was always, I have sixth gear, it's readily available. Sure, if everyone's swamped, I'll just take it, I can absorb it, whatever that looks like. And, I would be, if someone needed to take a call with someone in Asia in the middle of the night or Europe in the middle of the morning, I'm like, I'll do that, guys. It's fine. And now actually being clear that I don't have a 12-hour day or even a 10-hour day in me at the moment. Like I've put blocks on my calendars. We've moved actually within Dime to 25 and 55-minute calls with a take five at the top so that we need
Hmm.
like I needed it physically. I mean, just because of all the friggin' chemo side effects as I was coming back. But it's actually, I think, allowed everyone to go and quickly take the dog out or make a cup of coffee and still be really present and not feeling like you're late or whatever that looks like. And I've also been very transparent. To really get into the weeds, any medical appointment that I have, it's on my calendar in green, right?
Hmm.
And that's on the one hand, I've had to be really transparent with the team and say, like, these are the times where, like, no, I can't switch it. No, we can't roll over it. But also to say, like, this is a time where I'm actually not a CEO, where I'm actually a patient. And like, I'm making it clear that in these moments, like, I'm not reachable. And that's not to say that I'm not here to support you, but it's actually, I think, been quite good, certainly for me. And based on feedback from the team, them as well, they felt more confident saying, pediatrician's appointment and, taking
Yeah.
time to do this. And I actually think it's created quite a lovely environment where the entire sort of team Dime has really lent into figuring out what it is that they need and not holding back where they're comfortable. No one's forced to do it about sort of sharing what they're juggling on a daily basis.
Yeah. So, Jen, I'm curious if you think about, as a leader who was kind of you're still a superwoman, you always are in my book, but, who sort of acted like like a certain type of flavor of superwoman before, and now obviously is a different type. How do you see that impacting your team? Like, what are you learning now that you realize, oh, you know, being the person who would wake up at night, did that make your team feel like they had to do that too? Or how did you sort of manage that dynamic? And now that you're in a different showing up in a different way, are you seeing a different impact on your team? And then to take it a step further, what would you recommend? Or, when this is all behind us this year and hopefully you'll be healthy in the future, what are you going to take away? What kind of leader do you want to show up as?
Yeah, well, I think my first reaction to that, sorry, and I say it with a sort of a wry smile, is I think there's a fine line between superhero and martyr, and not for a
Hmm.
second do I think that I have ever martyred myself to anything actually, but it's sort of in particular work. But it when I can't think of a better analogy, but having spent a lot of time this year where not only has that sort of mythical sixth gear that, I used to think of as being sort of my superpower contributor to all of this, not only when you don't have sixth gear, but on some days, I mean, fifth is not available and you struggle to hit fourth, if at all, right? How do you actually think about being more judicious with your time, more intentional? How do you actually think about what it means to say, no, I'm terribly sorry, colleague in Europe, if you only have, calls at whatever time. Let's actually look out to next week where we could get something that's on the calendar at a more sensible time. Like, what do you win? What do you lose? What's actually urgent? And I think that that's been something that has been part of my thought process. And it's been pretty phenomenal watching the team do two things. One, sort of be able to talk openly, and I have, and be able to hopefully provide some good insights and coaching into, not letting other people's priorities be your priorities, thinking about when is something truly urgent, where we may need to flex outside our own boundaries that we need in order to sort of show up repeatedly and be happy at work and feel like you have some kind of balance. Um, And, when is it perfectly fine? And then, when it comes out in the wash, it will make no difference whatsoever if you sort of push it back, or, if you provide an update that there's been a delay or whatever that looks like. I think that's been one piece of it. And there's been so many, I mean, oddly, sorry, there's been so many sort of beautiful things that have come out of such a don't know if I'm allowed to say this, shitty year. But watching the team sort of step up and sort of swarm and really sort of take ownership and be so successful in doing it on sort of, parts of our activities where I used to be much more in the weeds has just been absolutely phenomenal.
Mhm. Yeah. It's one thing that I often tell people when they ask me about balance is, and I'll share it in case it's helpful for you, is that it's really a question of the zoom lens that you're putting on it, right? It's hard to have balance every hour. It's hard to have it every day, maybe even every week. But if you take the zoom out and you look at a quarter or a month, do you have a right balance among those things? And maybe that means that, some days you'll spend, for me, it's a lot of times family time or kid time. Well, I spend less time with my kids today, but over the course of the week, did I spend enough time with them? Or over the course of the month? And like yesterday, I surprised my son. I went to his birthday party at school. So, he was super excited because he thought I wasn't going to make it. But like last night, did I also have to crunch and like finish a bunch of stuff like in the evening and not spend as much time with him? Yeah, but it's okay because it balanced out, right? So that's what I think has helped me over the years is not to try to constrain the time zone or the zoom lens of the balance, but say like, okay, when I look at the bigger picture, generally speaking, am I putting my efforts in the right spots?
Sorry, I think I think you're absolutely spot on. I think that recognizing that there are ebbs and flows of these sorts of things and that we shouldn't over anchor to what we experience on a single day is incredibly important. And I actually think when we acknowledge that, we stop taking such a rigid approach where we are hard on ourselves you know, we if the balance skews in one direction or another, perhaps not as we had planned it on any given day, and that we are sort of tough on ourselves or even frustrated with sort of work or whatever that looks like because we're over anchoring to a single sort of data point. It has to be that sort of macro level balance and, giving us like taking the time to actually pop our heads up and look at that, I think is really important.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's take a deep breath. Thank you for being vulnerable. This has been really amazing to kind of hear about this journey. If we take a step back and think more like work wise, if you think about Dime, it's been what 5, 6 years now,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm curious, like early on, were there strategic choices that you made that you weren't sure what the right direction was, and or maybe there were like inflection points where you're like, wow, I could go this way or that way, and it could totally change. And you had to decide which way to bring the organization. Can you think of one of those and walk us through that moment?
I have two. I'll keep and, I think the first one was really sorry, how sort of our stance when we launched Dime and, what I had a lot of sort of voices around me saying, was that you're overscoped. And what I
Mm,
mean by that was I came into Dime with the idea that the digitization of healthcare should be the connective tissue that actually breaks down the silos, the many silos that persist within our industry, whether that's, we are over dependent on a disease based model. You see your cardiologist over here, and then you go and see your endocrinologist over there. Or whether that's the fact that, if you are participating in a clinical trial, right? You have to go in for your trial visit on one side of the campus at the academic center, on a Tuesday, and then you have to take another day off work on the Friday because you actually have to see your normal doctor and none of the data is being exchanged, none of the information's being exchanged, nothing's being consolidated. And so when I came in, people sort of asked, well, so what part of healthcare are you focused on? And we're like, no, we're focused on like the digitization of the ecosystem, whether that's public health, whether that's healthcare delivery, whether that's medical product development. And people would look at me like I had three heads. Well, but you have to focus, right? The focus offensive that you always get in the early days of any company. And I sort of said, but this is our differentiator. we are going to
Mhm.
be that organization that brings different stakeholders together, and we aren't going to be constrained by the sort of narrow lens of, well, we do R&D in pharma, and oh, well, we do commercial and medical devices, and we're a
Mhm.
physician practice group over here, and we're sort of a national payer. That we actually wanted to say, as we think about data that no longer lives in a file cabinet in a manila folder where only the practice manager or the PI has the key, where we can unlock that, where we can overcome the challenges of maldistribution of clinical experts and researchers and the patients who need them. Let's actually look at that through a macro lens. And, that we had some identity challenges, but we were consistent with our storytelling. And, sorry, as you said, we're about 6.5 years or so into time now. As we look at all of the efforts coming out of the administration with sort of the health tech ecosystem, we're finally getting to the point where there's sort of broad realization policy tailwinds to say we have to think about sort of public health and prevention in the same breath as we do healthcare delivery, or it's not going to sustain. Oh, and by the way, medical product development in the way that we know it now, with 10-year timelines and hundreds of millions of dollars and a 5% technical success rate and huge burden on participants, that's not going to work either. And we're starting to actually think about it as a macro level. And I think a lot of our success at Dime came through having the courage that that was going to be our differentiator, that given that we were an organization that really wanted to support the
Mhm.
industry and being sustainable, that that was the right decision. And the other example I'll give you, and actually not that many people know about it, few people on our board, and the very small team we had at the time. Sorry, we were about a year and a half into Dime, and I've been having conversations with a family office that was accustomed to writing sort of very big checks. And, just as a reminder, we are a 501(c)(3). And, we've been having these great conversations. And I thought I might get some kind of small to medium sized check and we might be able to do some programming. And I was really excited. And I get on the phone with them, and it was like November, December. So it was coming up to the end of a year, must have been in 2020. And they said, we'll give you $4 million if Dime pivots and focuses exclusively on cancer.
Wow.
And, you know, I think we made all of about $200,000 in 2019. And in 2020, I think, all told, we were just shy of like $2 million maybe, which was, I mean, we became a resource that people turned to during the pandemic. And I was so proud that we were ready for that. But all of sort of that aside, it was really hard work, and it was during the pandemic, and we were trying to do so much to show up for the industry, and that was sort of like tearing capacity at all sides. And I thought about what it would mean to just get a check. But in my heart, I just knew, I knew that we weren't like, I always wanted to be driving forward progress in cancer and oncology. And, you know, I thought we could probably be reasonably effective, but I also knew that we weren't the oncology experts, and that our expertise was as being expert generalists
Mhm.
in across the healthcare ecosystem, and that we had this commitment from the start that we wanted to take a macro lens and think about like big swing impact. And I'll never forget, I remember getting on the phone and declining that. And I then remember, like, sitting on the floor with my dog at the time and just bursting into tears, because I remember thinking, "I know I've made the right decision, but my god, I've just made it a lot harder for myself."
Yeah. Wow. So, what gave you the conviction to make that decision?
I think it was I think there are 2 parts. One of it is sort of healthy and functional, and one perhaps not, but turned out to be the right decision anyway. I think the first piece was, as I sort of mentioned, the vision from the start, the differentiator, the way that we were setting ourselves up as being that sort of big tent, multi-stakeholder sort of entity that really was looking for digital to be that connective tissue. It was just starting to return to us. I could see that during the pandemic, when we were trying to figure out how to continue clinical trials, how to have continuity in patient care, we were starting to cross pollinate different sort of pockets of work that we'd done previously. So I was starting to really see those signals. And so, that helped give me the courage to sort of stick with our
Mhm.
convictions. And then, perhaps the sort of asshole or like less healthy sort of part of this was I've taken so much shit for this for the last 18 months. I'm not going to crack now just because someone's here with their checkbook. You know, Perhaps it's a little bit of that sort of sunk cost fallacy, but I'm like, no,
Yeah.
no, absolutely not. I will not be broken. It doesn't matter what gets put in front of us.
Wow. Awesome. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit to if you sort of think about the practical things about let's call it your CEO pajama time stack, right? What fuels you in those moments? Like, are there newsletters you read? Are there podcasts you listen to? People you talk to? Is it you in a notebook? Like, what actually helps you sort of take that step back, think about the big picture, make those big decisions that matter? Not, in today's, especially as I know you're always on flights and so many meetings in a day, but taking that bird's eye view, like what is it the tactical stuff that actually helps you be effective in those moments?
I think there are a few different things. I think the first is almost by definition of Dime as an organization, while I spend a ridiculous amount of time every day actually in meetings, they are either with our internal team who sort of present me with like really great ideas and opportunities to sort of like swarm where they're a little bit stuck on sort of hard problems. And, that's energizing. And our team is fantastic. And I'm always better for time with them. And frankly, the rest of the time is actually with our colleagues and partners in the field who are doing magnificent things. And they will hop on the phone and, even beyond money right now, sorry, and I don't say this lightly, I think the scarcest resource that we have is time. They trust us, they trust me enough to share what their pain points are to help sort of position Dime to be running after the right things. They'll give us case examples of what's working well. They'll give me their take on sort of what's coming down the pike. And so I'm sort of incredibly fortunate and it's important. I do try and like remind myself of this when I look at sort of, a back to back day. And at the moment, these days, I block my calendar till 11 because I'm like sharp in the mornings. And also, then you
Mhm.
only have 6 hours maximum of meeting times, so 12. But the great thing about that is I do try and remind myself, like at some point in a busy day, that this is actually a gift and that's sort of helpful. You mentioned sort of reading, I'm not sitting around trying to set a calendar, but I don't think I do try and think reasonably regularly about what do I need to do and be to actually be effective in my role. And I
Mhm.
I feel strongly that I need to keep abreast of both the cutting edge science in our field and sort of, policy and investment. And so I really do try and spend about 45 minutes to an hour every day reading. And, of course, just like we were saying, you have to be flexible, right? You have to pop your head
Yeah.
up. You have to look at a more macro level. There'll be a couple of days in a row where all I do is try and like keep my head above water, not really still with a snorkel, right? But then I do try and make sure that I sort of dig in, whether I'm listening to podcasts or whatever it is. And the reality is, I find what we do not just important, though I think I've said enough that that's kind of a given at this point. It's really interesting. It's hard, fascinating problems.
Mhm.
And the people that you listen to on podcasts or the people who write sort of, great journalism on sort of health innovation, the policies that are coming out, particularly now, they are thoughtful and they're intentional. They're interesting to engage with. And again, I try and,
Mhm.
especially when I'm feeling close to overwhelmed, maintain that mindset of like, I have a really interesting job and it's important work and I speak to great people and we're a trusted partner. So the sort of long story longer to that is I think it's about the framing. I think it would be
Mm.
really easy to look on a Sunday night in our pajamas, at the week ahead and think about like in my to-do list when I look at what's urgent and what's important, my entire calendar is absolutely slammed with stuff that falls into the urgent category and not the important category. And sort of throw
Mhm.
your hands up and get sort of pissy about it. And, I always try and have the mindset that that's actually a gift and that allows me to be better at the important work when I can carve out time to do it.
Yeah. That makes sense. So, tactically speaking, how do you carve the time? Like, do you for the important, not urgent? Do you have like an hour, a certain hour a week, or how do you make sure that you actually do tackle that stuff of occasionally?
I mean, this is the most basic McBasic thing you've ever heard. So I am like, I'm actually going to show you. This is my to-do list, which may look
Mhm.
like the most, like, janky thing you've ever seen. I also have a note yeah, I also have a notebook with my actual notes from things like calls. That to-do list, that gets flipped over every few days, and if I carry something over for a few days, I look at it and I either say, "This is a task-based task that I'm not getting to," and I find a colleague who can take it from me because otherwise it's not gonna get done, and if it's strategically important, I will block time that day or the next day to get
Mhm.
it done. And it's a
Yeah.
really sort of analog, sort of a finger to the wind strategy, but that sort of process that I have of like maintaining a to-do list, it's not, using all of our sort of agile software and things that work for us at the team level.
Yeah.
But for me, it's either this isn't getting done, it either just needs to get junked because it's not important enough, it needs to get given away, or you need to do it today.
Yeah, I like that. If it moves over too many times, that's a good one. So, in the terms of reading or podcasts, are there specific news outlets or podcasts that you like to listen to that others should jump on board with?
So I will give a plug to one of your erstwhile colleagues. So I love Hallie Teko's Heart of Healthcare. So that is
Uh-huh.
usually the Monday evening dog walk. I subscribe to, I think, no less than about 12 different stat newsletters. I think they do sort of
Uh-huh.
tremendous work. And then I also I also actually find an enormous amount of value from LinkedIn. And sorry, I'm not like
Mm-hmm.
a social media person. Like I'm not on X or even
Mm-hmm.
personally on things like Instagram and like I'm not.
Yeah.
I don't have time for that. I don't. Um, I'm like I don't care what the Kardashians are doing, and I spend enough time with my own dog to look at other dog videos. So, but I do find LinkedIn to be a really good way of sort of maybe catching up with like an interesting sort of AI paper, like a scientific paper that I wouldn't have accessed otherwise. When
Mm-hmm.
I think about like the tremendous sort of work that will come out of like a Med City News or a Fierce or a
Mm-hmm.
Politico, that I don't necessarily subscribe to all of the newsletters, but it's a nice way that sort of trusted colleagues and folks that I partner with and try and do hard things with, if they're reading them, that's a nice way to sort of
Uh-huh.
curate the list. Um, and then, of course, we have our Dine Slack, and we actually have a really tremendous community of folks who surface pretty interesting work all the time.
Uh-huh.
I probably don't spend as much time in that as I should, but I try and spend like an hour a week at some point going through what our community is actually working on and proud of or struggling with. And I find that to be quite good, sort of boots on the ground signals for where we're at.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, if we look back over the last 6.5 years, is there anything you feel like you should have done differently or any mistakes you made that you regret or, oh, if only I had done something different at this moment?
Sorry, how long do we have? I mean, I'm so proud of where we are, but I mean, I think for all of us, right? Hindsight's 2020, and there's definitely things you think about doing differently. Um, I think one of the things that was frankly poor decision making on my part and was it sort of like cost us a lot of frankly sort of churn internally, sorry, was I talk about Dime often as sitting at the intersection of technological innovation and sort of, clinical excellence. And, as we started to grow, as we really had sort of a powerful sort of handful of early proof points around how we could support forward progress in the field, how we were actually delivering direct value to our partners as they would participate in our work and then take work off the shelf and sort of implement it, the market intelligence they would get from sort of being at the table with us, all of those different pieces. I'm really proud that, we started to grow really quickly. And the the way in which we grew, and sorry, I think this gets so much to your recognition of the challenges around sort of the paucity of pajama time and how thin it is and how like little time we have to actually sit and think for a second about strategy,
Mm-hmm.
digital medicine strategy, digital health strategy. This was like, how do we actually want to structure the team? And we spent a couple of years establishing and then sort of filling out, if you like, a pretty hierarchical org chart. One that if
Mm-hmm.
you looked at it maybe felt a little bit more like what you would see at like an academic medical center
Yeah.
than a tech startup. I lost some visibility into some of the pieces of the work where like I think I bring the most value to the organization where and I mean they all may listen to this and say that's low bollocks, but where I think like our team in a variety of different roles like enjoy having a monthly check-in with me as part of like like a retro, which is how we handle, or like a demo, which is how we handle things now. And it became pretty inefficient. There were a lot of steps for any information to be translated between our like scientific experts and like maybe our comms team up to me, up to like our ops team who are thinking about like staffing and making sure that everything is like everyone is positioned for success. It was the easy decision because frankly, it was the one I was most comfortable with and it didn't serve us. And it took,
Mhm.
like, I think that it led to a lot of, like, fire drills, like, things that were nearly finished that I finally got to look at, and we had to
Mm.
correct pretty
Yeah.
aggressively. That's not great for morale. It just means that, like, you constantly feel like we're in this state of fire drill, like, the system wasn't working for us, and so I'm proud of us. We had the courage to sort of course correct. We now sort of, operate Dime. If you saw sort of an internal org chart, if you looked at our ways of working, it's much more agile. It would resemble something like
Mhm.
you would see more it's sort of a true sort of tech-ish, we're not fully a tech team, but like a tech-ish startup.
Sure.
It has empowered the team enormously. They're doing a sensational job. We can move more quickly. We've almost eliminated those fire drills. But for almost 2 years, sorry, I will wholly own that I was the champion of that more hierarchical approach.
Mhm.
And even as it wasn't working, you know, there was roles and responsibilities because it was so over-engineered, because it was so hierarchical, and it was just
Yeah.
like, "Well, let's try this again," and, with the benefit of hindsight, I wish that I'd been much more intentional about sitting and thinking for a second. What is the nature of the work? What are we known
Mhm.
for? Like, we always talk about delivering clinical quality work on a tech timeline. Great, that means we have to, like, sort of outperform. What's the structure to do that? How can
Mhm.
we get the best out of people? And I never sat and thought about that. I leant into the most convenient thing. I let it persist for longer, and it resulted in some real
Yeah.
pain internally when we had to shake it up.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. It's almost like you needed almost like a McKinsey style staffing model where teams come together to do something and then disband versus kind of overly structured. Interesting. So many things we can keep digging into. Um, all right, so couple quick rapid fire to wrap it up. The first one is, what's a hot take? Something you'd kind of get in trouble saying at a conference or something.
Well, here's the thing, sorry. You've been to enough conferences with me to know that, like, I'm rarely worried about getting into trouble. So I've probably said all of the things at some point. Here's one perhaps I haven't, because I don't think I've been invited to any of these conferences. I have my thoughts on AI and this that, and the other, and certainly not shy to get into them. Sorry, the longevity thing. I just, it,
Mm,
I If I have to watch another video of some nutjob billionaire taking mushrooms and everyone just like thinking it's the best thing that they've ever seen, I'm going to lose it. And, the reality is, I say this not just as someone who is looking at the possibility of sort of technology for people with diabetes, the fact that the United States is on a human watch or like human rights watch list because our insulin, a drug that's been around for over 100 years, is so expensive that 1 in 4 people with diabetes don't even sort of, ration it for themselves because they can't afford it. The challenges with access, the crisis of rural healthcare, what I see every single day in the cancer center, like I'm focused on technology meeting the field where we are. And it's really hard to listen to and watch the hundreds of millions of dollars that's getting poured into this and I'm gonna be really direct, it's probably not particularly popular opinion, part of healthcare that just feels incredibly gratuitous.
mhm.
You know how many people, if you ask them, "Do you even want to add 10 years to your life as you're living it right now?" Like, it is so disconnected with the reality of the desperate needs of our system, and there are, to be fair, there are arguments as we start to go, sort of get these large personalized data set, perhaps at some point in the future, that's going to unlock our ability to do precision medicine and prevention. And I don't disagree. But when I think about the burning fire that is the day-to-day lives of so many patients in the United States, so many people caring for them, our clinical colleagues who commit suicide at higher rates than sort of any other profession in this country, who are leaving in droves, like, can we go after the right problem? Like, that's the one where, like, I have to leave the chat. Like, I can't, like,
Yeah.
struggle with that. And again, I see that there's a long play. I know that sometimes the most exciting innovation comes from trying something a bit different and it's what peels off that. I think it fails to acknowledge
Yeah.
the emergency that we find ourselves in as an industry in healthcare right now.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you
So
for
there's an
sharing.
opinion for you.
Yeah. All right, number 2, myth busting. What's a piece of advice that, people think that is true, but it's actually nonsense?
I think that I got really good in my career, and this is before I became a CEO, and bear in mind, I started in academic medicine, where, you know, I stopped feeling like I had to behave and dress like Mr. or Doctor so and so, who, at 60 years of age would still introduce himself and tell you that they were chief resident at Hopkins and whenever the hell it was, right? That I didn't have to be um, imitating that person in order
Mhm.
to be excellent and in order to be taken seriously. I have a big personality. I have a lot of energy. As we've just found out, I'm not short of opinions. I also really care about people and I will show up for people in sort of different ways. I won't hold our team at arm's length. I won't hold our partners at arm's length. And I think the moment that I got comfortable with not having to hide my personality in order to justify the fact that I was really good at my job and that I'm an expert and that I should be taken seriously was actually a really big moment for me. I used to be an athlete. I have massive shoulders. Sorry, you are never going to find me in a suit blazer ever, ever. Don't own one. Own one, not going to, right? Will, I will sort of share punchy opinions. I will give personal anecdotes. I will crack a joke during a presentation. I'll start a one-on-one with how's morale. Like I, I think like the biggest myth is that you have to be this sort of like tightly buttoned up sort of unapproachable human in order to be a successful executive. And that might be right if that's your personality, if you don't feel comfortable, but I think actually you're successful where you don't have to check any of your personality at the door when you show up for
Yeah.
work, where you can have enough courage that you're excellent and that you're there to do good work and that people should listen to you and people should trust you. And that to me, when I busted that myth for myself, sorry, honestly, that's when my career took off.
Yeah. Well, it's good that you did bust it because I like you how you are. So, last one, the signal? What is something that you think is a huge signal happening in healthcare and tech right now, but people are not paying attention? So, you can't say AI because they're already paying attention. So, what's like some signal that looking back will be like, wow, oh my goodness, that was happening?
So sorry, I'm actually going to offer one that I know that you and I agree on. You've written beautifully on this, and I've been sort of quietly paying attention to this for about the last year or so, and I'm really starting to see it take off. So if we actually look at direct
Hmm.
to patient sort of pathways that are being championed by pharma, I think, and you can jump in after this. I think that both you and I would agree that that's emerging not just as what I think some people may just dismiss as an easier way to get access to GLP-1s, in the market, but actually, if we look at the way that patients and individuals are sort of flocking to this pathway, if we look at the sort of broad, just absolute exhaustion and frustration for having to ongoing sort of endure the costs and inefficiencies of going via a sort of PBM intermediary. Like,
Uh,
I think that this isn't just emerging as a care pathway that's going to be important to pharma. I think we're going to see other products, whether that's devices, whether it's digital products, sort of
mhm.
taking this on. And I think it's actually going to emerge as a care pathway that's part of a sort of truly hybrid sort of care ecosystem, and that this will be sort of well established as a way that patients, wherever they're located, if they choose, can access care. And I specifically say care instead of prescription.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, not to get too deep in the topic, but I do think there's a lot of work to be done to make it seamless and accessible and cost efficient for patients. But what I think is interesting about it is it's like a shakeup, right?
Yeah.
It's changing dynamics. And even just seeing how, you know, the government's kind of getting in on the game a little bit and
Mhm.
it's shaking up relationships between pharma and PBM, with Lilly shifting over away from CVS and sort of some of these dynamics that are emerging and the different kinds of players that are coming into the space, I think it's almost creating a little bit of like a put everything in the bag and
Yeah.
shake it around moment that we'll see where it all lands out, but it is creating an opportunity for something different. All right. Thank you, Jen, for sharing your time and your insights, and thank you for being vulnerable. I know it's hard to do, when you are trying to show up as that CEO that you are. So we really appreciate it, and looking forward to seeing you at the next event, and hopefully you'll come there in nice, easy mode, and we'll get to spend some good quality time there. So thank you.
Of course. Sorry, it's always a pleasure when I get to chat with you. And, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, or in the work that you're doing around sort of this notion of CEO pajama time, how lonely it can be sometimes. And, how do we actually sort of support one another in creating time to do the strategic work that really no one else can do. So, as I said, always a pleasure sort of getting to chat with you, and really enjoyed it today.